Hi, I'm Robert Saunders. It's nice to meet you. Today, what I want to introduce you to is the Healing Place Ministries, and our purpose and our focus is on Christ Jesus and His healing abilities and His power and His love for us. But in that, what we're going to discuss is 4 modules briefly that we will bring to you, your church, or to your group, and teach you about addictions, afflictions, and life-controlling issues. All of which Jesus Himself is personally interested in healing not only you, but your loved ones and those in your community. So here's an opportunity to set aside some time, take a look at this video. I'm just going to go quickly through the 4 modules and give you a chance to soak that in. And we're going to start with module number 1. For example, we're going to talk about the different aspects of the brain on drugs of various different kinds. And right here, this is a healthy brain of a SPECT scan. And what SPECT stands for is single photon emission computed tomography. Is a nuclear medicine and tomographic imaging technique using gamma rays. So it's like a 3D image in short. And what it shows you is a healthy brain, kind of, if you could see it bigger, it actually looked like a walnut. Now, each brain represents a different addiction. Here's a person, a human brain, 3 years of meth, age 22. And it matters not whether you're a man or a woman, the effects are the same. The holes that you see in the brain are not actually, or literal holes, they're actually dead zones. That means that portion of the brain is not operational. It's very critical. This is the very top, or the cerebral cortex of the brain, the very top layer where emotions and thoughts and feelings and logic and learning all take place, and especially in the frontal lobes. And what you see here is the 4 years of alcohol, age 21. So at early young age, they started drinking. They're now an alcoholic, age 21, and their brain is shot. 2 years of marijuana, age 16. You see, it's dramatically different. And nowadays, marijuana has become so legalized and so acceptable, but look at the damage it's doing to even a young brain that needs to grow and change and adapt. And now it's dead in many, many places. This is a healthy drug-free brain. This is 2 years marijuana. This one is 3 years of smoking, age 16. You notice there's not a whole lot of difference. There's a lot of cavities and holes inside of the brain of a nicotine user at age 16. 6 years of inhalants, or huffing they call it, age 24. And 3 years of cocaine, age 22. These people, their brains are at a point now where they can't logically think through things. Another thing that I wanted to discuss just briefly in Module 1, as well as what we're going to talk about in the brain scans, both the PET and the SPECT scans, is the statistics. In America today, 25% of the American people deaths are drug-related each year. 25% of all American deaths are related to a drug abuse or drug overdose. 65% of underage drinking acquire their alcohol from family and friends. That's facilitating or enabling a young person, a teenager, under the age of 21, to actually consume alcohol. Drug-addicted people have 527,000 combined emergency room treatment visits each year. 88,000 deaths in America are alcohol-related, as reported by the 2014 Centers of Disease Control. 62,000 of them are men and 26,000 of them are women. Among American 8th graders, just as another, what they're doing is they're taking statistics from 12 years of age and up. So here's American 8th graders. 52% have tasted alcohol, 41% have smoked cigarettes, and 20% have tried marijuana. As far as tobacco goes, just regular cigarette use, 71 million Americans smoke. That's 29% of the population. That includes ages 12 and over. 16% of pregnant women ages 14 to 44 smoked during pregnancy. And the cost, we want to just go over this briefly, the cost of drug abuse in relationship to other medical costs per year in America. Diabetes cost America $131 million. Cancer, one of the most talked about diseases The most compassionately talked about diseases, cancer, $171 million. And the one that's not talked about so much is drug use or drug abuse, $484 billion a year. In Module 2, what we're going to talk about, and this is very interesting, it's called the cycles. And everybody lives in cycles. And cycles are a chain of events that start with one thing called a trigger. For example, the big cycle, which we call addictions, starts with a trigger. And everybody has a trigger in their addiction. Some people it's anger, some people it's depression, some people it's bad news, some people it's the smell of something or the sight of something that reminds them of some time when they used to use drugs or alcohol. So what the trigger does, and it's kind of like a gun firing, as you pull the trigger, the hammer starts to fall, and we call that the buildup phase. Now, briefly, the build-up phase is simply the momentum that starts everything. The trigger starts everything. In the build-up phase, there's many, many parts moving inside of this. Everything from multiple triggers going off to time. Sometimes the time span is short, sometimes it's long. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes it could be just a few minutes before there's actually a period of time where I'm going to justify my actions. And there's basically a couple parts. One, during this build-up phase, I'm going to enter a justification phase. First part of justification is, I'm entitled to this. I can do this. I've had enough build-up. I've had enough stuff happen. I'm over it. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Everything's bad anyway. And I justify my acting out. And acting out is nothing more than the relapse or the use of a drug or alcohol in order to cope with the issue that never got dealt with, which the trigger simply set off. So now what's happened is the hammer has fallen, the firing pin has hit the primer, and the primer has ignited, and the bullet is now being propelled out of the barrel of the gun. That's the acting out part. Then we go through another phase of justification, which is simply, well, I had my reasons. Now I'm starting to feel a little guilt and some remorse because I know that this wasn't really what I needed to do, but I did it. Now I got to justify my guilt and my shame and my remorse. And some people justify it by stuffing it and not talking. Then you have, once you get through that phase, a person will go through what's called pretend normal. Pretend normal means, no, everything's fine. I mean, hey, that was just a little slip. It's no big deal. And the danger in that is, all we do now is we go back into a cycle that says everything's fine until the next trigger, but I've not done anything about the problem, which is really lurking out here, and it only takes one trigger or a couple triggers to set it off all over again, and that's called an abuse cycle. Now that we've talked about some clinical in Module 1, and then we talked about the cycles in Module 2, I want to talk to you about three aspects of Module 3 that come out of the addiction from three different points of view. But let's first discuss what an addiction is. More than 3 decades of research supported by the National Institute on Drug Abuse has proven that addiction is a complex brain disease characterized by compulsive, at times uncontrollable drug craving, seeking, and the use that persists despite potentially devastating consequences. Addiction is also a developmental disease that is, it usually starts in adolescence or even childhood and can last a lifetime if untreated. So clinically speaking, the first module, the disease module, brings in the environmental aspects, which means where do I live? What is my culture like? Then there's the neurological. Do I have some other predisposed neurological problem, like a birth defect or something that happened at birth? My mama dropped me on my head or something like that. And then we get into genetics. Well, and I used this one in myself back in my alcoholic days. My mom was an alcoholic, therefore I must be an alcoholic. I inherited it, like allergies or the blonde hair, the gray hair at 50 or whatever you get. genetics. Those are three of the aspects that come out of the disease model, speaking both secular and clinical. Then comes the moral issue of addictions. And a moral issue reveals addiction as a result of human weakness. People call it a human weakness from this aspect. Another one they call it is a defect in character. And we're going to discuss in this module, what does this mean and how does society view addictions? In one culture, alcoholism is nothing. In other cultures, it's awful. In some cultures, drug use, such as cocaine, is no big deal. It's just part of the scene. And in another culture, it's horrible. Defective character means, well, they must be weak morally. They don't have any strong beliefs about themselves, and they're morally poor, that kind of thing. And we'll talk about those. Also in this module is the biblical, which I really want to get into, and we will during the module. The biblical model reveals and defines man's dilemma or problem as rooted in his nature, birth as a result of sin. In other words, we're going to talk about the fall. And in the fall of man, which goes back to the garden, where did all of this even become an issue? When they walked out of relationship with God, they became susceptible to anything that felt good. And the first thing we read about is murder right after the expulsion from the garden. So we'll talk about the fall of man. We'll also talk about sin. And what is sin? Well, in the middle of the sin word is I. So it's a me, myself, and I disease. And we're going to talk about how the Bible views addiction and how Christ himself biblically will be able to prove how he wants to set us free from any addiction, affliction, and life-controlling issue we may have. So in Module 3, we'll cover all three of these things in depth, and a lot of feedback will have to come from the audience. So this is not just a lecture course. This is a course where everybody gets involved, everybody can talk and ask questions so that they can get a clear understanding of what they're up against. Because teaching about addictions and afflictions and life-controlling issues takes education. It takes the time that it is needed to be able to sit down in front of somebody and understand where they're coming from. And this course will teach you that. In the fourth module, what we're going to talk about is the role of the minister. What I love about the word minister, it doesn't mean the pastor. The minister is the person whose heart God has given to go out and take care of those who can't take care of themselves, to give away what they don't have, and never expect anything in return, the role of the minister. So what is your role in addiction recovery? We all play a role. And the minister's role is a spiritual leader to the person who is spiritually starved. Another part is we're going to talk about is the spiritual realm. This is a very real realm. Now, not every addiction has a spiritual aspect to it, such as an opiate addict that simply got addicted after a surgery and pain medicine overwhelmed the brain. And we'll get into stuff like that. So we don't approach everybody as though they have a demon. Although there is very specific three demonic forces involved in addiction, because when a person's outside of Christ, they're susceptible to anything, especially the torments of the enemy. And the first spirit that we will discuss in the module is the tormentor. And there's 5 aspects to the tormentor. The first aspect is the fear aspect. It comes out of 2 Timothy 1:7. Then we have the oppression spirit, which is Acts 10:38. The infirmity spirit, which is Luke 13:11 through 13. We'll talk about the hindering spirit from 2 Corinthians 12:7. The suicidal spirit from Mark chapter 5. And then also we'll talk about the unclean spirit. And there's several verses in the Mark 1, Mark 3, and Mark 7 that discuss the unclean spirit, which is a spirit that drives you into your addiction, and especially the addiction of pornography, which I call the silent killer. The other one that we'll talk about is the evil spirit, which is the devil himself. And that's going to be talked about in several cases, as Jesus said that the devil came to steal, kill, and destroy. So in these 4 modules, what you'll get is a very in-depth training session of how to take this to your community and to those that are hurting through addiction, afflictions, and life-controlling issues, and apply it to their lives and teach them spiritually how they can be healed through Christ. This isn't a get yourself together training. This isn't a white knuckle your way through and somehow you'll overcome your addictions by rebooting and rewiring. What this is about is coming to Christ in the fullness of your helplessness and having the power of God overcome the illness and the deception of the enemy and clean that person and heal that person in the name of Jesus. Thank you.